Someone once said, we'd better pay attention to the future because that's where we're going to spend the rest of our lives. Yet too often those are just words to many people who end up finding themselves fixed almost entirely on the present. Or they dream about the future, but they do nothing about it. And so their dreams seem at best elusive and at worst unattainable. But to believe that about the future is a mistake. Hello, my name is Joel Barker. And we've come here to talk about why positive visions of the future are so important, even essential, to nations and organizations, to corporations and communities, to individuals young and old, to each and every one of us who want to make a difference in the world. I began my study of the future in 1973, just as the Vietnam War was ending. OPEC had taken control of energy pricing. Watergate was beginning, and inflation was soaring beyond control around the world. For many people, from corporate leaders to the person on Main Street, the problems of the present seemed so overwhelming that it seemed pointless to think about the future. And yet, in the midst of all that turbulence and pessimism, I came upon the works of three scholars who showed me that having exactly the opposite attitude, a positive one, was much wiser. Each of these scholars, in his own way, convinced me that it is essential that we think about, dream about, and ultimately envision our own futures, especially in the really tough times. In fact, I believe that having a positive vision of the future is perhaps the most forceful motivator for change that you and I possess. We are now going to take a journey to see how these ideas fit together, and to see how we can use these ideas to make our own organizations, our own families, our own lives richer and more fulfilling. We begin our journey here because of a Dutch scholar, Fred Polak, who wrote a book entitled The Image of the Future. Polak was intensely interested in the relationship between nations and their image of the future. He asked a kind of chicken and egg question. Is a nation's positive image of its future the consequence of the nation's success, or is the nation's success a consequence of its positive image of its future? To find an answer to that question, he read the literature of many nations, both ancient and modern, to see how positively they wrote about their future and how well they lived up to their expectations. What he found is perfectly symbolized here in Athens at the Parthenon. The Parthenon was first a vision in the mind of the architect. So too did the Greeks envision the future of their culture. How did this all happen? Well, the Greeks began with dreams, but then they changed those dreams into something much more powerful: vision. Vision is the result of dreams in action. What Polak found in his research was that significant vision preceded significant success. In example after example, he saw the same pattern emerge. First, a compelling image of the future was offered by leaders. Then that image was shared with their community, and they agreed to support it. Then together, acting in concert, they made the vision a reality. It was true here in Greece 2,500 years ago. And it was the same for Rome, and for Spain, for Venice, for England, for France. It was the same pattern for the United States of America. And even today, we can see the power of vision sweeping across the world, from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Rim. What is particularly interesting to me in Polak's research is the fact that many of the nations, as they began their climb to greatness, did not have the right resources, or the critical population base, or an obvious strategic advantage. In fact, they succeeded against the odds. What they did have was a profound vision of their own future. And that is the key ingredient. Not the only one, but the first and most important. Nations with vision are powerfully enabled. Nations without vision are at risk. I used to be a school teacher, and after I read Fred Polak, I realized that what he was saying for nations was equally true for children. Children are profoundly affected by their vision of the future. From my own experience, I'd seen a pattern. My very best students always knew where they were going, what they were going to do with their lives. When I read Benjamin Singer's scholarly work, The Future-Focused Role Image, I found that my observations were strongly reinforced by a lot of research. The research summarized by Singer indicated that low-performance students had almost no sense of their future. Their focus was strictly short-term, and they believed the ability to shape their future was in the hands of fate. They were personally powerless. The research also indicated that successful students had a much greater personal sense of control over their future, and they thought in time horizons of 5 to 10 years out. One thing in particular intrigued me about the research. In identifying the successful students, IQ and family background were not the key indicators of success. Some of the most successful students came from very difficult family and social situations and did not score well on the standard IQ tests. Some of the most unsuccessful students had genius IQs and came from the best of families. So, what was the key differentiator? Vision. What all the successful students shared was a profound and positive vision of their future. I can think of no better place to bring Singer's observations to life than to visit this elementary school, PS 121, in Harlem, in New York. Here in 1981, Eugene Lang came to give the commencement speech. He had graduated from PS 121 in 1933 and was now a successful, wealthy, self-made man. He had a lot of concern over the problems these children faced, and so he was planning to try to instill some hope in them. But as he sat on this platform and looked across the faces of those sixth graders and their family and their friends, he realized that words alone would have little meaning. So on the spot, he changed his speech. And the changes in his speech would change the lives of those children forever. He began by making a personal connection to the children by telling them how he had been in Washington, D.C. when Martin Luther King had given his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Then he said to those sixth graders, "Everyone must have a dream. Your dream is important. It can be your future, and education is the key to that future." He spoke to their journey through junior high and then senior high school and then on to college. But when he said college, he realized that college must seem unattainable to most of these kids. So he said to them, "And don't think for a minute you can't go to college, because you can." And then, with the family and friends listening, he promised those sixth graders that he personally would provide each and every one of them who graduated from high school a college scholarship. Here were these sixth graders thinking that they could not expect to go to college, and all of a sudden, this promise. Mr. Lang sat down to the cheers of the audience, but he knew that money alone was not going to make this happen. He would have to provide a pathway to the promise. So almost immediately, in addition to giving his money, Mr. Lang created a support structure of the teachers and parents and community to work with these students to make sure that they would realize their marvelous vision.